The St. Louis Rams were the kings of the NFL in 1999. Led by MVP quarterback Kurt Warner, who was only a few years removed from working the graveyard shift, stocking shelves in a grocery store, preceding a stint in the Arena Football League, the Rams obliterated their opponents all year, earning the moniker Greatest Show on Turf, before capping the season by hanging on to win the 34th Super Bowl over the Tennessee Titans. But it sure didn't look that way to start. The Rams spent big bucks to sign Trent Greenaway from Washington to upgrade from Tony Banks at quarterback. Those plans ended before they began when Green tore his ACL in the preseason on a low shot from Chargers safety Rodney Harrison. So in stepped Warner, who was only there in '99 because the Browns chose not to select the unprotected signal caller in their expansion draft. And now, 5 years after going undrafted out of Northern Iowa, Green's injury provided the opportunity he'd spent so much time preparing for. He'd immediately capitalize, passing for more TDs through 4 career starts than anyone else ever on his way to authoring one of the greatest seasons a quarterback's ever had. It was a Cinderella run beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Head coach Dick Vermeil then retired, leading to the promotion of Greatest Show on Turf architect Mike Martz, and there was no slowing down this runaway locomotive over the next 2 years either. They were an embarrassment of riches on offense, with Warner flanked by Pro Bowl wideouts Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt, explosive slot receiver az-Zahir Hakeem, all-reliable Ricky Prohl, whose game-winning touchdown over Brian Kelly in the NFC Championship propelled them to the Super Bowl, and electric tailback Marshall Faulk, who also doubled as a star receiver, even topping 1,000 yards in '99 when he broke the single-season record for yards from scrimmage. And of course, Warner needed sufficient time to execute all the 7-step drops in Martz's offense, which human brick wall Orlando Pace provided at left tackle. By the close of the '01 season, a snapshot of this 3-year reign of terror shows an offense that led the league in points and yards each year, including the league's first ever 7,000-yard season in Y2K, while lording over the rest of the league by scoring 583 points more than they allowed, with no one else even in their solar system. Warner bookended these years with MVP trophies sandwiched around a season when Faulk won it in the wake of breaking Emmitt Smith's single-season touchdown record. Throughout this time, they won an NFL-high 37 regular season games, 2 conference titles, and that Super Bowl 34 championship. They were flying high, on top of the world, until they weren't. After advancing to Super Bowl 36, where the Rams were down a touchdown with just a minute and change left, Warner connected with Prohl for a game-tying touchdown. But then Tom Brady did what Tom Brady does, Adam Vinatieri did what Adam Vinatieri does, and just like that, an era with so much winning and fireworks and fun vanished in a puff of smoke. A month later, on March 6, 2002, the Rams lost the heart and soul of their defense when the Bills lured middle linebacker London Fletcher away, and St. Louis missed him. Coordinator Lovie Smith's unit, which was ranked 3rd in 2001, slipped down to the middle of the pack in '02. On the offensive side, Az Hakeem left for a lucrative deal and the opportunity to start in Detroit, while Kurt Warner completely lost his mojo as his magical carpet ride from undrafted 4th stringer to grocery store restocker to Super Bowl and league MVP came to an abrupt end. The Rams lost each of the first 3 games in '02, with the reigning MVP throwing just 1 touchdown against 7 picks heading into a Week 4 game against the Cowboys that would turn out to be his final Rams start in St. Louis. Warner broke his right pinky from a hit on just his 2nd pass of the game, which knocked him out of action for nearly 2 months. Jamie Martin started the next week in San Francisco and bruised his knee in a loss that dropped him to 0-5. So in stepped Mark Bulger the next week for his first career game action, and he'd go on to start and win the next 5 games, evening up their record at 5-5. But they hit some serious speed bumps along the way. Aeneas Williams, their all-pro corner who never missed a single game in any of his first 11 seasons, was already hampered by turf toe, victimized by the very playing surface that helped spark their offense to unprecedented success. Then in week 7, with the outcome clinched and less than 2 minutes remaining till their bye week would provide a chance to get healthy, Williams suffered season-ending leg and ankle injuries. In a week 10 game versus the Chargers, Marshall Faulk messed up his left foot and right ankle, and was lousy down the stretch once he came back from those injuries in what marked the beginning of the end for the future first ballot Hall of Famer. During their Monday night win the next week, Bulger sprained his right index finger, but despite Warner's dismal play early in the season burying the Rams before Bulger resuscitated him, Martz insisted there was no quarterback controversy, and the plan was to return to Warner for their next game anyway. And like clockwork, the Rams' losing ways returned as they came up short in DC and Philly. Another broken bone in his hand ended Warner's season while bringing a dark cloud of needless drama to the organization. See, Martz had explained it was he who ordered x-rays for Warner's hand, only for the quarterback's wife Brenda to call up a sports talk radio show the next day to basically call the team's head coach a liar, that Martz did not insist that he get an x-ray. Martz had nothing to do with it. The doctors never once said that he should get an x-ray. All week long, I said, "Kurt, I am a nurse. You should get an x-ray." He said the doctors just think it's bruised. Thanks, Brenda. Anyway, with Bulger returning to the lineup in Week 15, he got his 6th win in as many starts before he hurt his spine on the first drive the following week in Seattle, ending his season as the Rams fell from the remarkable highs of 99 through 01 to 7-9 in 2002. So while both QBs were each injured multiple times in 2002, among their starts where they weren't knocked out in the first few plays, Warner was 0-5 and Bulger was 6-0. Despite that, in February 2003, Martz let it be known early in the offseason that Warner was his guy going into the next season with no competition for the job necessary. But he'd lose another key weapon in free agency the next month. Postseason hero Ricky Proehl, who came up clutch time and time again, signed with the Panthers. In their opener, on just the second time that season Warner dropped back to pass, he was clobbered by Giants defensive end Michael Strahan with a hit that jarred the ball loose and left Warner concussed. He'd go on to play the entire game, with the 2-time MVP unable to hold on to a football, fumbling another 5 times, and was even confused when Martz called plays, leading to an overnight hospitalization. He'd be cleared to return for their following game, but Bulger got the nod to start in Week 2, though initially trying to handle a brewing quarterback controversy by taking things week to week, Martz sorta tipped his hand. After Bulger and the Rams beat the Cardinals in his 3rd start of the season, Brenda Warner again took to the radio, this time to publicly inform the world that her husband wanted to play, and if that wasn't in the cards in St. Louis, he'd welcome a trade elsewhere. Those remarks led to Kurt's admission that he was starting to imagine moving on from the Rams a little more every day. But the wins kept coming under Bulger, who still had the league's top wide receiver duo to throw to, and following their Week 12 victory in Arizona, their 8th in 10 games with him under center, Martz officially made the change permanent, effectively ending the Warner era in the process. 3 weeks later, they clinched the NFC West after beating the Seahawks with a little help from the back judge who tripped Seattle wideout Bobby Ingram on a potential game-winning touchdown. But in their first playoff game, Mark Bulger threw not 1, but 2 hideous fourth-quarter interceptions, then added a 3rd in OT, before this Steve Smith walk-off touchdown on the first play of the 6th quarter ended the Rams' 14-game home winning streak and their season. 4 days later, Lovie Smith, who orchestrated a monstrous defensive turnaround immediately upon his arrival, left to take the head coaching job in Chicago. And as much as they'd miss Brenda Warner's lovely radio bits, the time had come to move on from their legendary quarterback, and they cut Kurt Warner on June 1st, 2004. They'd regress from 12-4 to 8-8 that season, which would be the final one for Aeneas Williams, who retired in the 05 offseason to kick off a year of change and tumult both on and off the field. For starters, second-year stud Steven Jackson took over as lead back for the 2005 season, relegating Marshall Faulk to backup duty. A day after a Week 5 loss left him at 2-3, an ailing Mike Martz needed to step away from the team to treat a bacterial infection of his heart, with linebackers coach Joe Vitt filling in. His first game as interim head coach was a disaster. Not only did they get blown out on Monday night in Indy, but Mark Bulger hurt his throwing shoulder early in the 2nd quarter, knocking him out of the next 2 games, during which it was also announced Martz wouldn't be returning that year. And it was during this time away from the team that Martz's relationship with management deteriorated. In Week 7 against the Saints, during just their 2nd game without Martz on the sideline, Martz tried to have a cell phone brought to his offensive coordinator to talk to him in the middle of the game. Executive Jay Zygmunt put the kibosh on that and brought the issue to team president John Shaw, who refused to allow an open phone line in the coach's booth. Blocking that communication pissed an ill Martz right off, especially because he wasn't given any sort of heads up. He'd already been butting heads with his front office and now reached the point where he was unsure if they could even coexist. So with turmoil surrounding the organization, it didn't help matters when about a month later, Kurt Warner, now a Cardinal, made his first trip back to St. Louis since they cut him. Warner carved up his old squad in his finest game since his 0-1 MVP season 4 years earlier. And the loss not only dropped the Rams to 4-6, virtually killing any postseason dreams, but also saw Bulger re-injure his throwing shoulder, knocking him out for the rest of the season. Then, with just a couple games left, Martz had gotten medically cleared to return for the season finale, but the Rams chose not to let him, then fired him the day after their 6-10 season concluded. To replace him, St. Louis hired Nick Saban's offensive coordinator, Scott Linehan. A few days before Linehan's first training camp as a head coach, Marshall Faulk underwent major reconstructive knee surgery, wiping away his 2006 season while putting his career in serious jeopardy. They did kick off the Linehan era by winning 4 of their first 5 games, teasing their fan base into thinking they'd perhaps turned a corner, but nope. They'd immediately lose 7 of their next 8 en route to an 8-8 season and another January on the couch. The Rams would head into 2007 having lost 17 of their previous 29 games, but those would seem like the good old days compared to what was coming. First, in late March, Faulk's career did indeed succumb to his knee problems, and the Hall of Fame back officially retired. Then in the next month's draft, picking 13th overall, the Rams chose Nebraska defensive lineman Adam Carricker, who played 2 years in St. Louis, missed a third with a shoulder injury, then was shipped to Washington for a couple late-round pick swaps. The very next selection was Darrelle Revis, who quickly became the top cornerback in the game and the best player on a squad that reached multiple AFC Championship games. Oops. When the 2007 season rolled around, the wheels totally came off. They got horrific quarterback play from Bulger and Gus Frerotte, and they finished a 3-13 season a couple weeks before team owner Georgia Frontiere passed away in January 2008. The next month, they said goodbye to the aging Isaac Bruce, who in his time with the Rams had become the 3rd leading receiver of all time. With Bulger coming off a pitiful season and quarterback a glaring need heading into the 2008 draft, they opted to again go D-line, using their 2nd overall pick on Chris Long. Though Long would go on to have a nice career, future MVP quarterback Matt Ryan was taken with the very next pick. They'd get blown out each of the first 4 games of the 2008 season, at which point they fired Linehan and promoted D coordinator Jim Haslett, which was simply rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic amid a 2-14 season. Steve Spagnuolo was the lucky winner who got to try and clean up the rotten sewage that the organization had descended to. And for those who thought surely it was impossible to sink to even lower depths, the 2009 Rams inspired folks everywhere by proving nothing is impossible. With a couple longtime stalwarts aging, the Rams had some painful decisions to make. 4-time All-Pro left tackle Orlando Pace, who was once an indestructible force and started every game in 7 of his first 9 seasons, had now missed 24 of the Rams' previous 39 games, and they cut the Hall of Fame blindside protector on March 10th. 3 days later, they cut wideout Torrey Holt, the only man to ever post 6 consecutive seasons of at least 1,300 receiving yards. Again, owners of the 2nd overall pick in the draft, the Rams chose Baylor tackle Jason Smith in an effort to replace Pace. He started 26 games for them before the team moved on from their turnstile and pads. They'd go 1-15 in 2009, the first team to ever lose at least 13 games in 3 straight years. But the most delightful thing is that they barely ever even put up a fight, instead usually just laying down for their opponent. In the quarter century prior to the 2008 season, the entire NFL combined for just 1 instance of a team losing 7 games in a season by over 20 points. Then the Rams did so in both 2008 and 2009. They draft quarterback Sam Bradford 1st overall in 2010, and in August, minority owner Stan Kroenke, who helped get the team moved from LA to St. Louis in 1995, bought the majority share of the team from a couple of Frontiere's kids. The Rams sort of rebounded with a 7-9 season behind their Rookie of the Year quarterback, But that was their apex under Spagnuolo, and topping out at 7 wins is just not acceptable football for the Rams. So they went out and hired Jeff Fisher. He'd get one healthy season with Bradford before his quarterback's ACL started exploding anytime someone looked at him wrong, which doomed any chance of success together. Following the end of Fisher's 4th season in St. Louis and a dozen straight seasons failing to post a winning record, Kroenke pushed Command Z on the move 21 years earlier, and on January 12, 2016, the Rams said goodbye to St. Louis to return to the City of Angels. The Rams were a cheat code for 3 years, but relentless injuries at the most important position in sports, drama and resentment engulfing the organization, father time, and embarrassing draft miss after embarrassing draft miss caused everything to collapse in the blink of an eye. One thing I did not realize until after shooting this video, Scott Linehan's initials are STL. That's gotta be the reason St. Louis hired him over fellow finalist Ron Rivera. Anyway, thanks for watching, like, subscribe, and click to watch more teams collapse, you masochists.